Hello, hello. So today we're chatting about the CBC with differential and the thyroid panel. And I'm wanting to go over this because, as much as I love the functional testing that I do with nutrient testing and getting down to the root cause level of those deficiencies, I really, really love to look at people's CBC with differential because you can get a lot of information out from that. And I just thought it would be cool to be able to show you how maybe to take a look at yours. So hopefully you got the message about maybe bringing on one of your own tests and just see about the things that I'm talking about. Now, so I am streaming through a different platform onto Facebook and YouTube. And so if you have questions, you're going to have to tell me in the comments who you are, because it'll just show up, or it won't show up as your name unless you've given StreamYard approval. So just make sure if you have questions that you're letting me know who you are. All right, so let's first talk about the thyroid panel. This is something that I talk about on a regular basis with people, and it is something that's really frustrating to me because it's really hard for people to get their full thyroid panel, to get all the answers. And I've talked to healthcare providers who are, licensed to be able to order and prescribe medications for thyroid. And if they're in sort of the more conventional setting for their practice, they are not trained. I mean, they've all told me they're not trained to look at all the numbers with regard to thyroid. So that's why when you go to a lot of practitioners and you say, I would like a full thyroid panel, and they usually are resistant to doing that, or they tell you that insurance won't cover it, or whatever the excuse is. Those are some things that I've heard. I've also been told that those numbers don't tell us anything, but the people that I've talked to, when I've asked for those tests, that's what people have told me, or other, doctors or nurse practitioners or whoever have told me personally. But then the ones that I've talked to just on a personal level, they've told me that they are actually not trained in those things. They don't really even know what that is. They are trained to draw the TSH and the T4, and that is it. They don't even know what to do with the numbers when they get them. So I'm sure because they don't have a lot of time in their practices, what they do is they just do what they know, and that's how they're trained, and that's how they go on about their day. So it's not because they're trying not to be helpful, they're just not trained to be helpful in that way. So I'm going to help you to look at your own lab so you can figure out how, maybe what you can do. Now, I'm not a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a PA, I can't prescribe thyroid medications to people when we look at the results. But what I can do is help people, help support their thyroid function underneath. So meaning at the cellular level with nutrients and lifestyle and that type of thing. So that is the goal when I'm working with people, if we can't get medications adjusted or if we can't get a full panel. So if you have your thyroid panel out, or if you just want to jot this stuff down, I recommend just getting a piece of paper and checking this out. But the common things that you will have drawn are called a TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone test, and that will show you what the pituitary in your brain is telling your thyroid gland to do. So the pituitary is saying, we need to crank it up and we need to produce more thyroid hormone, or we need to crank it down and we need to produce less thyroid hormone. So that TSH is a reflection of that, similar to the thermostat in your house, how you regulate the heat and air conditioning in your home. It's similar to that. It's a negative feedback loop that has your brain talking to your thyroid. So go ahead and take a look at that. And the normal ranges, and I just looked at my ranges, my actual ranges from my recent labs, and it's through Quest Labs. And I think that this is pretty much nationwide. These are common ranges, but I've seen a little bit variations depending on the lab they're coming from. But 0.45 or 0.4 even to 4.5 is considered normal for TSH. Now, in practice, when people are in that range, even if they're at a 4.5, right at the top end of that range, they typically are going to feel worse. So the higher the number of a TSH, usually the worse people feel. And everybody's different. Everybody has to kind of know their numbers. But the 4.5, I find people are having symptoms and they're struggling and they're not getting the support they need because they're in those normal ranges. And they usually won't get a change of medications or maybe not the right medications or no help at all because they're quote unquote normal, even though they may be presenting with a ton of symptoms. So I have found, and then in the functional world, people have found that people in that 0.4 to 1.5 tend to feel the most optimal. That's where people feel their best. And then if there's people like me who don't have a thyroid gland and have been on suppressive medication because of thyroid cancer, a lot of times we're overtreated because of the cancer. And so our TSHs will be a lot lower, so that they sort of clinically present as, hyperthyroidism. And that's not always that great either. But generally speaking, the lower the number, people tend to feel better. Again, not 100% across the board, but it is common. When you get people down into, the 1 or below, people are starting to have better energy. They're starting to have less joint pain. There's better cognitive function. They're not so brain foggy. That's a huge factor with the TSH number. But there are numbers that are much more important. And I know if you do have some labs out, you might have a total T4 and a total T3. I don't even really pay attention to those. I look at the free levels of those. So the free T3 and the free T4, and often those aren't even drawn. But those are the levels of your thyroid hormone that are unbound and available to your cells. That's why it's more important, in my opinion, to look at those. Now, if we're talking about free T3 and free T4, we need to differentiate between the two. So T4 hormone in your body is the most abundant, but it's also the least potent. Okay, so T3 is less abundant, but more potent. It's more like your active thyroid hormone. So that's why that number is really important, and it's very rarely drawn. Very rarely drawn. So the normal range for free T4 is 0.8 to 1.8. Now, it's more ideal if you're in that top half of the range. So, at least at like 1.2, 1.4, something like that. And above, that's where you're going to feel your best. So now you have T4, enough T4 in your cells that's going to be able to convert into the T3, which is your active form of the thyroid hormone. All right, so then the free T3 ranges are from 2.3 to 4.2. Now, again, a lot of times, if you fall in that normal range, they'll just kind of look away and say that everything is normal, even if they do draw these numbers. But the ideal functioning for someone is going to be if they're up at that top quarter of the range. So free T4, top half of the range, free T3 would be the top quarter of the range as far as how you're going to feel. And again, these are, variable. Everybody's different, but this is what I would say the people I work with feel. This is how I feel best when I'm in these ranges. And also lots of studies have been showing and researched on more of the functional and optimal levels of thyroid hormone levels. And this is where people tend to fall. Then there's something called reverse T3, which you could consider is sort of, it implies that it has to do with T3, which is your more active thyroid hormone, but reverse T3 is an inert or inactive version of the T3. I hope this is all making sense. If you have questions, make sure to post your comments and I can try to answer your questions here, but make sure you put your name in there too. Okay, so the reverse T3, what happens is when your T4 needs to convert into T3, you want it to be in that free T3, the unbound active form, to help you feel and function your best. If it converts from T4 into something called reverse T3, think of it as sort of a holding tank, and it's inactive. It just sort of sits there and doesn't do anything, doesn't get to your cells. That's usually due to too much T4 medication, like too high of a dose. And it can be due to stress, like your body is so stressed out, you don't have the good nutrients that you're taking in, and so it converts right into reverse T3 instead. So it never gets to your cells, and you never start feeling better. Now, I know when I started testing this on myself, um, I can't remember who I got to test it because I know my endocrinologist wouldn't. And then when I brought the results to him, he kind of laughed it off and said that it really didn't mean anything. But my number, the range, the normal range is 8 to 25, but there's an optimal range in there. My number was in the, I think it was like in the 80s or something like that. So it was very high. I had such high dose of T4 and it would convert right into this reverse T3. And that's why I was still feeling terrible, even with medication management. So the best optimal range for your reverse T3. So if you haven't had this done, try to get that done. I can help you order your own labs actually if you want. It's probably best between say 9 and 12. You don't want to get too high up to the 25 range and you don't want to be too low either. So I would say 9 to 12 is sort of the sweet spot for reverse T3. And then the antibodies, TPO and thyroglobulin antibody, you want it to be less than 0.9 and less than 9 for TPO and less than 0.1 for thyroglobulin. So you probably don't have those tested ever unless you have been diagnosed with an autoimmune thyroid condition like Hashimoto's. Some people will get them drawn if they're suspecting some kind of autoimmune condition. But again, sometimes they'll be at a certain level and they'll just be passed off that it's no big deal because it's still under that normal. It's not even a range. It's a less than 9 is the value that it's given. And sometimes what happens is that if we're having a response from something going on in your body and your body is producing its own antibodies, it's sort of a red flag that there's something going here, even though there's not an overt level of antibodies attacking the thyroid gland. So it's something we absolutely need to pay attention to. And that's what I was saying when we started, that I can't prescribe medications, of course, but what we can do is look at nutrients that affect the thyroid function, that affect your stress levels, because stress and thyroid don't play well together. And so we need to really make sure we can optimize the body at the root cause and at the baseline level, so that if you are taking meds, they're going to work better. If you are if you need medications, you might need to have a lesser dose. Sometimes we get over medicated with these things. I see that a lot. Then, if there's any questions on the thyroid panel, I can't see anything here. So if you guys are posting questions, I'm going to have to look after the fact. They're not showing up here. So I will definitely go to those and check it out. But I want to go into the CBC with differential. So that's a complete blood count. With differential just means the percentages of the cells we're looking at. So most everybody has these probably once a year if you go to get blood work once a year at least. And what it's just looking at is all the different types of blood cells in your body and what levels they're at. So oftentimes I see people come in with thyroid numbers that are, in the normal range, not ideal, but in the normal range. But then we look at their white blood cells and their other, mostly their white blood cells. This is what I'm going to focus on today. And what happens is they have some elevations and some, maybe low levels of some of these different white blood cells, which are indicative of different types of infection, which then goes to why they might be tired all the time or have this low grade energy all the time, or have symptoms of just feeling like they're sick, but maybe they're not actually sick. They're not diagnosed with anything. And this is where a lot of times people will say, you go to the doctor and they'll say, well, it's just probably a virus and there's nothing to do but rest, taking fluids and that kind of thing. So if you have these numbers, it kind of can make sense to you. And then you can, again, start supporting the body underneath it all so you can help your body heal and feel better. So when we look at the CBC with diff, you'll go to the WBCs or the white blood cells, and they'll give a total count of your white blood cells. And I would do this in hematology lab. You literally count the white blood cells on a smear when they get them on a slide, or they put them on a dish, depending on what they're doing, but they literally count all the blood cells. And if you have a total white blood cell count in that 5 to 8 range 5 to 8, you have a normal level. If you are a little bit too low or if you're a little bit too high, it's going to be indicative of some kind of low-grade infection. It's not definitive exactly, but your white blood cells are part of your immune system. They're the cells, the blood cells that fight off infection of all kinds. But that's why we need to know the difference, the breakdown. That's what the differential part of this is having a complete blood count with the differential, and that's showing you the different types of white blood cells and the breakdown of those. So if you have one in front of you, go to where it starts to talk about the neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils, okay? So then there'll be a percentage next to them. And here are your ideal numbers. And you can always write this down, check where yours are, and write on your lab, or just write it down and come back and look at this training for later. But neutrophils, you're going to want that to be less than 60%, okay? Less than 60%. Lymphocytes, you want it to be less than 30%. Monocytes, you're going to want to have less than 7%. And if you're going to have eosinophils and basophils, you want them to be less than 3 and less than 1. Let's see here. Okay. Cindy says, we're going to go back to thyroid for a second. Cindy says TPO was tested for the first time after dealing with thyroid issues for 20 years. That sounds about right. It was 442. Does this test Hashimoto? Yeah. Again, I can't diagnose because I'm not a doctor, but that is part of how they diagnose Hashimoto's disease. So for all intents and purposes, and it sounds like they said you have an underlying autoimmune issue, I would pretty much go forward that it's an underlying thyroid autoimmune issue. So Hashimoto's disease, if your antibodies are that high. So a lot of times medication, I don't know if you're on thyroid medication or not, but if you are, that should help to take those down. But I have seen where people are on medications, doing everything right, eating perfectly, and their numbers still don't go down. So there's something else kind of brewing there. So this is where you want to really be mindful of, mostly whole foods, looking at any foods that maybe cause you some sensitivities that can flag some of that autoimmunity and cause inflammation in your body, because there's inflammation somewhere that's causing a lot of this to happen. So, it's hard to know specifically, but there's lots of things that can be done to help do this, to help reduce those antibodies. But at the bare minimum, I know it sounds like not big information, but it's really important to get the sleep. And if you are not sleeping properly, you need to, work on that like it is a job, getting your sleep in check, because then your body will regulate its stress better. And then that helps the thyroid function better to help reduce inflammation. So there's so much to be said about that. So if you do have any other thoughts or comments on that, or if you have any more questions, just let me know. Okay, so to jump back to the CBC with diff. So I said the neutrophils less than 60, lymphocytes less than 30, monocytes less than 7, eosinophils less than 3, basophils less than 1. This is given in percentages. Now, if you have, for example, if you have neutrophils that are at 70%, that is indicative or looks like it could be some kind of bacterial infection. And so when you go to the doctor and you are super tired and sick, you have all these symptoms, and they run a CBC with diff, they'll look at your white blood cell panel, and if you have elevated neutrophils, they're probably going to treat you with an antibiotic if they're not just using your symptoms. If you had elevated lymphocytes, for example, so let's say those lymphocytes were at 50% when they should be under 30, then they're going to be thinking that's probably a viral infection, so antibiotics are not going to work for this. And obviously, it can get deeper than that if there's secondary infections and secondary symptoms, and that's for the doctor to decide what process to go through and what the best course of treatment is for you. But what we again do is just work nutritionally and lifestyle wise to support the body underneath it all. This is the whole goal, so that you can understand what your numbers mean and then sort of help yourself. Because how many times people go to the doctor and feel terrible, and they, even if it's just like a cold type of thing, And they go to the doctor and they say, oh, I didn't get anything. It was just so frustrating. They wouldn't give me anything to help. Well, oftentimes there's not things to help, but you can help yourself by being as healthy as it can be underlying. Okay, just kind of like with the autoimmune thing we just talked about. Monocytes, if those are elevated, that's indicative of viral. And then the last two can be indicative if they're elevated as parasites. And I swear parasites are all the rage right now. Everybody I talk to has been told that they have a parasite. And you know, yes, people get parasites. It's not uncommon. We actually, you know, we're just encountering them all the time. It's not going to be too far-fetched that we would have some kind of parasite sometime in our life. It's that when our gut can't have the good bacteria to help fight, and then the good levels of health and other white blood cells to help fight off those infections, that's where it starts to, you know, get out of control, where we don't feel well and we really get bogged down with those symptoms. So again, if you have something with a parasite that looks like a parasite, then we need to work on your gut health, right? We need to look at, you know, what are your gut microbiome like? You know, what kind of foods are you eating? What kind of water are you drinking? Have you traveled? Have you gone out of the country? Have you, you know, been super stressed? Things like that. There's all types of things to look at here. So it's not all about looking at your levels to find some kind of medication. If you need medication, absolutely take it, figure out what the best thing is for, and that's what your doctor is going to be for. But if you don't support the body underneath it all, it's going to be really hard to get healthier and to, you know, overcome these things. Or sometimes people have recurring situations with a low level virus and things like that. Cindy says, thanks so much reading your book and just starting week 2, feeling better already. Okay, so you have Levo and that it helped lower the TSH. Good, and you're almost within range. All right, that's awesome. Well, thanks for reading my book. I appreciate that. I'm glad you're starting to feel better. And levothyroxine, so let's just talk about that a minute. So levothyroxine is like the generic form of Synthroid, which is the most commonly prescribed T4 thyroid medication. So it is a T4 only medication. And so with her taking T4, I'm assuming it's at like maybe 100 micrograms, maybe 88 micrograms. I don't know, maybe it's even lower. But that T4 is going to lower that TSH number. So remember I said TSH is sort of opposite of what you think. The lower the number, the better you feel. And so if you're getting it within range, that's awesome. But what can we do to support your body underlying so you can get into the low end of normal, so it's more of an optimal functional level? But that, again, is very individual. I know people who can get up to 10 or 12 and don't really feel symptoms. And for myself, I mean, if I get to 5, I have symptoms, or 2, I have symptoms. It just really depends. In contrast, when I was going through my thyroid cancer and my treatment, I was at like 100 or 125 or something crazy like that. So, you know, it just really, it really gets to be really personal and individual. So you have to be mindful of that. And also, one takeaway from here too is, oftentimes, especially for some reason, especially thyroid disease and thyroid imbalances, people go to the doctor and they're feeling like absolute garbage for sometimes, like even Cindy said, 20 years she's been dealing with stuff, and they don't really test everything, or they maybe just like say, oh, that's just part of getting older, or now you're having hormonal changes because you're, you know, it's just one reason for the other for your symptoms, but they don't ever really get to it. And that is why we need to have the knowledge and to know our numbers, know what they mean for us, as opposed to maybe what they mean for your friend or your mom or whoever, because everybody is different. Every body is different. So just be mindful of that, and also be proactive and understand these things. And people are scared of, I think, medical stuff and going to the doctor. They're scared to talk to their doctors. They're scared to get the information. And frankly, there's so much information out there that it's almost like there's no information out there, because it's overwhelming and people get bombarded, and a lot of it's inaccurate for sure. I come across that a lot. So just try to, I don't know, listen to me, and I'll be as honest as I possibly can. And if I find new information, I'll change my mind or change the with the new information. But I'm going to give you the most up-to-date things as I come across them, and also as I work with them with people. So, look for people like me, and there's others out there trying to really help people get the information they need, especially when it comes to thyroid. One thing about the eosinophils, so that's oftentimes tied to parasitic infections, but there's an autoimmune condition called eosinophil esophagitis. I feel like I'm not saying it right, but it's basically where people have the reaction in their esophagus, and when they eat certain things, and dairy is a big trigger for a lot of people with that, but then their eosinophils are super elevated because of this overreaction by their immune system attacking their body when they eat certain things. And so then if you have elevated eosinophils, it could be something like that. Maybe you don't have the full-fledged, condition that's the autoimmune condition, but maybe you have a lot of symptoms when you eat certain foods. And, that's part of what Cindy's talking about in my book. I take people through a process to kind of figure out which foods are helpful to their body and which foods are not helpful to their body. So that's the whole point of that. So if there are any other questions, if there are not any more questions, like I said, if I can't see them all in this chat here, I'll look online and get back to that for people too. But you can also reach out to me. One thing I would say is that if you're looking at trying to just build that baseline health for yourself and to keep that going, and you want to actually understand why we do what we do to get healthy and stay healthy, you might want to consider checking out my Fatigue Fix Inner Circle membership. It's a monthly membership, and it has a ton of information on there, lots of self-assessment. So it's really, I don't know, I don't want to be the gatekeeper of all this information, to at least just achieve baseline health. And then if you have more things you want to look into and dig into, that's available to you too. But if you're in the membership, you get those things at a better rate than just the individual, like one-off appointment type rate. So it would be really beneficial for those it'd be beneficial for everybody, but it would be beneficial for those that are having these kind of underlying things and trying to figure things out, and maybe not getting the most support from whoever their primary provider is, because that's really not what they're in the business to do. They're, reacting to whatever your labs are and giving medications, and then you're on your way. So I'm trying to teach everybody how to achieve their health, and then how to keep their health. And like I said, there are things in there that can help you, guide you each month on your specific concerns. So anyway, that is what I'd invite you to do. I'm going to put the link for that in the comments. And so let's see, I'm going to get this up here right now so I don't forget. It would be really great to see more people in there. It's just such a unique place where we meet once a month. And like I said, in the modules, there's so much support for people between the month to month time frame. And so it's, I don't know, just a lot of information, but it's not overwhelming in the sense that you're not going to know what to do, because you take it step by step. You take it, how it comes for you. And it's supposed to be just, a nice, easy place to get better and stay better, because that's the thing. A lot of times people jump on the bandwagon of, the newest, latest, and greatest quick fix type of thing. And then it's not sustainable, and people can't keep doing it. So then that's kind of silly to waste time to do that. But anyway, I put the link in the comments, and hopefully you can see me in there. We have our next one is on Tuesday, May 9th. So hopefully we'll have more people joining and can jump in there, and you can enroll anytime you want. All right. If there's no more questions, I'm going to head out here, but enjoy the rest of your weekend. It's finally nice out around here, so it's fun to be able to go outside and not freeze or blow away. So have an awesome night, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.